My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter, and not long ago, I watched my family's world turn upside down in the most unexpected way imaginable. For most of my life, they saw me as the invisible one, the afterthought, the daughter who was bookish, too intense, and, in their words, not cut out for big things. Compared to my older sister Harper, charismatic, magnetic, the family's golden girl, I was merely the quiet one who spent too much time in her head. They dismissed my dreams, my discipline, and my drive, until the day they needed me most. It happened in a hospital room. My sister had been rushed in with a serious complication. My parents were frantic, criticizing every delay, assuming as always that someone more important would eventually show up to take charge. Then the nurse walked in. She glanced around the room, spotted me sitting quietly in the corner, and straightened. With calm reverence, she bowed her head slightly and said, "Good afternoon, Chief of Surgery. I didn't realize you were already with the patient." Time stopped. My parents' expressions collapsed into silence. Harper's jaw fell open. For once, no one had anything to say. Before I tell you how we got to that moment, how a lifetime of being underestimated led me to the top of one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country, I want to take you back. Back to when I was just a little girl with a secondhand science book, and a fire no one else seemed to notice. Because I didn't just prove them wrong, I proved myself right. I was 8 the first time I realized I was invisible. It was the morning after my sister Harper's 9th birthday. She had been showered with gifts, Barbie dream houses, a karaoke machine, a giant cake shaped like a unicorn, and the living room still smelled like frosting and glitter. I wandered downstairs, clutching the small science encyclopedia my grandmother had given me. I'd spent the night before reading about the human brain, tracing the ridges of the cerebrum with my fingertips. "Look, Mom," I said, holding the book up like it was a trophy. "Did you know your brain sends signals faster than a car can drive?" My mother glanced up from wiping icing off the chandelier and gave me a faint smile. "That's nice. Evelyn, could you help clean up? Harper's piano teacher is coming early today." That was it. No spark of curiosity, no follow-up question, just dismissal. Harper came bounding into the room a minute later, still in her birthday pajamas, and was immediately engulfed in praise. "There's the birthday girl," my dad exclaimed, lifting her off the floor and spinning her around. She squealed, and I stood silently with my book, already forgotten. That moment was typical in our household. Harper was sunshine bold, beautiful, and endlessly adored. My parents, especially my father, seemed convinced she was destined for greatness. They enrolled her in everything: ballet, piano, advanced language arts. They told anyone who would listen that Harper was a natural leader, born for the spotlight. I was something else. Quiet. They'd say at dinner parties, with a shrug and a smile, "Evelyn's the thinker." A bit serious for her age. The implication was clear: Harper dazzled, I disappeared. My father, Robert Carter, ran his own financial firm. He was obsessed with image-tailored suits, polished speech, the right kind of friends. My mother, Lorraine, had once dreamed of being an interior designer, but traded those plans for PTA meetings and perfect family photos. They weren't cruel, exactly, but they lived in a world where appearance trumped substance. And I, awkward, intense, fascinated with the inner workings of the body, didn't fit the mold. Harper fit it like a custom glove. In school, I excelled quietly. I loved math, biology, and anything that required focus. I wasn't the kid who needed a gold star, I just wanted knowledge, and the quiet joy of figuring things out. But that wasn't what impressed my family. I remember getting a 100 on a standardized test in 5th grade. I came home beaming, paper clutched in hand, waiting for praise. My dad gave it a quick glance and said, "Good. Try to keep that up." That evening, Harper told them she'd been selected for a solo in her school play despite having forgotten most of her lines in the last one, and they went out for celebratory ice cream. I stayed home, reviewing anatomy flashcards I'd made from printer paper. If you're thinking this sounds bitter, I get it, but it wasn't. Not back then. I didn't even have the language for injustice. I just thought, maybe I wasn't built for celebration. Maybe praise was for people like Harper, people who made others feel something just by walking into a room. At night, I would lie in bed with a flashlight under the covers, reading books about cells and surgery, imagining myself in scrubs one day, holding a scalpel steady. I loved the idea that you could open someone up, fix what was broken, and give them their life back. It felt like magic. Real, tangible magic. And it became my secret. Because somewhere along the line, I realized it wasn't worth sharing my dreams out loud. Every time I tried, they were brushed aside or met with skepticism. Medicine, my mother once said when I brought it up over dinner, you'd need perfect grades and a real sense of confidence. Honey, that's a tough road, Harper chimed in, laughing. Plus, you'd have to talk to people all day. I laughed too, back then. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't want to make it awkward. Because I knew, instinctively, that no one in that room believed I could do it. So I stopped trying to convince them. I built my world in silence. I turned our garage into a makeshift lab, dissecting frog specimens from science kits I bought with birthday money. I begged our librarian to order books on human physiology. I watched TED Talks on surgical breakthroughs when everyone else was watching sitcoms. My parents thought I was just quirky, maybe a little obsessive, but they didn't pay much attention. What they did pay attention to was Harper's every move. When she got a B on a math quiz, they called her teacher to ask if the test was unfairly hard. When I got an A+, they'd nod and move on. When Harper was cast as a background tree in the school musical, they bought her flowers and took her out to dinner. By middle school, I knew what role I played in our family. I was the understudy to someone else's lead. But that knowledge didn't break me. It steeled me. Every slight, every dismissal, every "that's nice." Evelyn became another brick in the foundation I was building beneath myself, one no one could see yet. They say people rise in different ways. Harper rose with applause. I rose in silence. And one day, I promised myself, I'd rise so far that even silence wouldn't be able to hide me anymore. By the time I reached high school, I had perfected the art of being overlooked. It's strange how invisibility can become comfortable. I learned to take pride in flying under the radar, in achieving without spectacle. While Harper's every accomplishment was broadcast like a press release student council, dance team, school paper, I kept mine tucked away in folders and notebooks, where they could be safe from dismissal. I joined the science club in my freshman year, mostly because it gave me access to the school's lab after hours. That was where I met Mr. Hargrave, my biology teacher. He had thinning hair, thick glasses, and the dry wit of someone who'd been teaching for too long, but he noticed things. One afternoon, after class had cleared out, I stayed behind to study microscope slides. Mr. Hargrave hovered for a moment, then pulled up a stool beside me. "You know," he said, gesturing toward the image of a cell I was sketching. "I've seen seniors who couldn't identify structures that quickly." I glanced up, startled. "I've been reading ahead. I can tell." He smiled faintly. "You've got the makings of a researcher. Or a surgeon." It was the first time anyone outside of my own imagination had said that word to me. That moment lit something in me, a small but fierce spark. Mr. Hargrave began giving me extra reading material. He encouraged me to apply for a summer program in biomedical sciences, helped me write the essays, and even drove me to the interview when my parents said they were too busy. That summer, while Harper was in Paris on a chaperoned photography tour. I was working in a real lab, shadowing medical students and conducting rudimentary experiments. I didn't tell my family much about it. I had learned by then that their interest was always conditional. When I mentioned the lab once over dinner, my father responded without looking up from his phone. "Sounds technical." My mother asked if I had met any nice boys in the program. Harper chimed in with a story about a boy she met at a vineyard outside Bordeaux, so I stopped bringing it up. I let them talk about Harper's travel blog and her new DSLR camera, her curated social media following, and the compliments she got from the neighbors. Inside, I stored my quiet triumphs like treasure. SAT scores top percentile, Science Olympiad regional champion, volunteering at a local clinic over 200 hours logged, recommendation letters glowing. When it came time to apply to college, I set my sights high. I didn't tell anyone I had applied early to Johns Hopkins. I didn't want to deal with the skeptical looks or the unsolicited advice about setting more realistic goals. The day the acceptance email came, I cried. Not because I was surprised I had earned it, but because it was mine alone. I printed the letter and folded it into the back of a notebook where I kept a list of every rejection I'd ever endured from my parents, from peers, from the world that didn't see me coming. When I finally told my family, my father raised an eyebrow. "That's a hard school." "Are you sure? I said. He nodded, still unconvinced. "Well, don't push yourself too hard. You don't want to burn out chasing something that might not be worth it in the end," my mother added. "At least you'll be near D.C., lots of good hospitals. Maybe you'll meet a nice doctor." I smiled tightly, already retreating behind the wall I'd built. Harper was, at that point, planning to major in communications and take a gap semester to travel. At my high school graduation, Harper wore a designer dress and posed for dozens of photos. I gave the speech as class valedictorian, and no one in my family recorded it. Instead, my parents posted a picture of Harper adjusting my graduation cap and captioned it, "Our girls always supporting each other." They didn't hear the speech. They didn't hear me thank Mr. Hargrave or talk about what medicine meant to me. But I didn't need them to hear it. I needed only one thing to prove them wrong. College was my first taste of freedom. Johns Hopkins was a world where no one knew my family, where no one assumed I was second best. It was hard. Yes, brutally so, but I thrived in the rigor. I lived in the library. I worked in labs. I made friends who were as obsessed with anatomy as I was. We spoke in acronyms, stayed up arguing about case studies, competed for research assistant spots and surgical shadowing. It was heaven. During my second year, I got into the university's surgical assistant rotation. It was rare for undergraduates. I earned it by scoring highest on a diagnostic challenge and impressing the director of clinical engagement with my composure under pressure. That year, Harper dropped out of college. My parents spun it as a brave, intuitive decision to find herself. They said she had creative instincts, that the traditional path just wasn't for her. She moved home, started a lifestyle blog about mindfulness and tea blends, and received nothing but praise. When I told my parents about my research project being selected for a national symposium, my mother replied, "Harper just partnered with a wellness brand. They sent her free candles." I hung up the phone and went back to the lab. My motivation wasn't spite, it was fuel. Every dismissal added to the quiet fire building inside me. I didn't need applause. I needed skill, mastery, control. I wasn't chasing praise, I was chasing competence, certainty, and eventually, authority. I was becoming a surgeon, and whether they knew it or not, I was already far beyond the story they kept telling about me. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from knowing the people who are supposed to believe in you never really did. I felt it most during my junior year at Johns Hopkins. By then, I had accomplished more than I ever imagined, co-authored a research paper on early neural regeneration, led a pre-med student mentorship group, and secured a coveted internship at one of the top trauma hospitals in Baltimore. Professors respected me. Peers sought me out for study groups. Residents called me steady hands during shadowing. But my parents still thought I was figuring things out. Every phone call home followed the same dull script. How are your classes? Busy, but I'm doing well. Are you sleeping enough? Yes. Mom, any nice boys? No, Mom, don't work too hard, sweetheart. We don't want you burning out. They always sounded so concerned, like I was hanging on by a thread instead of excelling. After each call, I'd stare at my phone, fingers twitching to send them photos of my surgical badge, my lab results, my published paper. But I didn't. Because I knew what would happen, they'd nod politely, say, "That's great, Evelyn," and pivot to Harper's latest endeavor. At the time, she had rebranded her blog into a wellness consultancy and started hosting yoga retreats. My mother sent me links. My father told extended family Harper was an entrepreneur. I was working 60 hours a week, rotating through trauma centers, prepping for the MCAT, and still somehow, I was the one who needed to rethink my pace. So, I stopped updating them. Not out of spite, but preservation. I started treating my accomplishments like a classified mission need to know only. My inner world became quieter, but sharper. I poured my energy into precision, into resilience, into becoming the kind of doctor who wouldn't just enter an OR, but command it. I told myself, let them think you're failing, just make sure you're not. And so I rose. Silently. Steadily. One day during senior year, I was prepping a cadaver in the surgical lab when Dr. Larson, my mentor at the hospital, pulled me aside. She was a no-nonsense trauma surgeon with a scar down her left arm and a reputation for making students cry, yet she never once raised her voice with me. "You've got presence," she said, pulling off her gloves. "Not just knowledge. The calm, decisive kind that makes people follow orders without thinking twice. That can't be taught." That evening, I walked alone through the campus, crisp autumn air biting at my cheeks. I sat by the reflecting pool outside the library and cried, not because I was sad, but because someone finally saw me. Really saw me. The next time I spoke to my family, they didn't ask about school. My mother spent 20 minutes talking about Harper's latest Instagram collab. "She might be on a podcast next month," she said excitedly. "Isn't that wonderful?" I nodded, smiling through the phone. "Are you still in school?" she asked eventually, like it was a casual hobby I might have dropped. "Yes," I said, "still in school." I didn't mention that I had just been accepted into Columbia University's medical program with scholarship support and 3 letters of recommendation that used the words exceptional, leadership, and once-in-a-decade potential. They wouldn't have known what to do with that information anyway. When I moved to New York City for medical school, I did so alone. No going-away dinner, no send-off speech. My parents helped me load a few boxes into my car and offered the usual blend of caution and detachment. "You'll need to be careful in the city," my dad warned, like I was moving to a war zone instead of starting one of the hardest and most rewarding journeys of my life. "Let us know if it gets too hard," my mom said, patting my shoulder. "It's okay to change your mind." You know, I didn't even bother replying. That night, I drove through Manhattan with the windows cracked, feeling the hum of something electric. I wasn't running away anymore. I was running towards something. I arrived at Columbia with a focus sharper than I'd ever known. Medical school is supposed to break you, but I found peace in the pressure, the sleepless nights, the adrenaline of rounds, the beauty of fixing something no one else could. I barely noticed when my parents stopped calling as frequently. Our conversations, already hollow, turned transactional. "Do you need money? Are you eating enough? How's your roommate? They didn't ask about my work. They didn't know about the surgeries I observed. The professors who pulled me aside to say I had surgical hands, or the scholarships I won. I had learned not to offer things they would only reject or reduce. It was during this time that I started to think differently about what family meant. Not in the Hallmark card sense, but in the structural sense. What if family wasn't who you came from, but who made room for your growth? I found mine in scrubs and surgical masks, in late-night study sessions and group rotations, in a community of people who didn't care where you came from, only how steady your hands were in an emergency. Still, despite everything, there were moments, tiny flickers, when I wished my parents could see me as I truly was. Not to applaud me, just to understand. But those were dangerous hopes. Hope can rot the foundation you've built if it's pointed in the wrong direction. So instead, I focused on building something no one could take away from me, brick by brick, suture by suture, title by earned title. I wasn't just training to be a doctor anymore. I was becoming the kind of woman no one could dismiss, not even my own family. They say residency is where you either become a doctor or burn out trying. For me, it was something else entirely. It was where I became steel. Columbia's surgical program was relentless. 80-hour weeks, rotations that blurred into one another, the perpetual ache of standing for hours, scrubbing in, suturing, assessing vitals, calculating dosages. Some of my classmates cracked under the pressure. Others hardened. I disappeared into the work. I thrived on it. Not because it was easy, but because it made sense. The world inside the OR was pure, clear. You earned your place with precision and grit, not charm or convenience. There were no gold stars for good behavior, just a relentless demand for excellence. I found comfort there. During my first trauma rotation, a senior attending watched me work through a collapsed lung on a trauma dummy and said, "Carter, you've got ice in your veins. You're made for this." That same week, I called home. I don't even know why. Some part of me, still raw, wanted them to know that I wasn't just surviving, I was rising. My mother answered. "Still at that hospital?" she asked after I said hello, like I might have casually dropped out and moved back home to start selling candles online. "Yes, just finished a 26-hour shift." Oh my. A pause. "You really should be careful with your health. You're not superhuman." "Evelyn." I blinked at the wall. "It's part of the process, Mom. It's normal." "I just don't know why you put yourself through all that," she said. "Harper's starting a meditation course. She says it's life-changing. You should talk to her." I thanked her and hung up. I didn't call again for months. The irony was, by the time I was excelling in one of the most demanding programs in the country, my family was telling people I was still figuring out her path. I only found out because my cousin Josh mentioned it at Thanksgiving. "I heard you're thinking of switching to pediatrics or something less intense," he said. "Stuffing a roll with cranberry sauce?" I stared at him. "Where did you hear that? Your mom," he said surgery was burning you out?" I smiled, tight-lipped. "No, I'm actually publishing in JAMA next month and presenting at a national conference." Josh blinked. "Oh, wow." "Yeah," I said, "but I'm sure Harper's meditation class is also fascinating." He had the decency to look embarrassed. That night, I sat in my car outside the family gathering for 20 minutes before driving off without saying goodbye. I couldn't go back inside. Not with that familiar heat building in my chest, the dull ache of being misrepresented again, and again, and again. One of the worst parts wasn't the indifference. It was the invention. They didn't just ignore my story, they rewrote it. My mother told her friends that I was considering stepping back from surgery to focus on wellness. My father once introduced me to a colleague as our daughter, the student. Not doctor, not surgeon, not even resident. Student, at that point. I was leading trauma drills and running midnight consults for new interns. I had earned every letter after my name with sweat and sleepless nights. But to them, I was still the little girl with her head in a book and no real future. When I confronted my parents over dinner one weekend asking, gently, why they kept downplaying what I did, my father waved it off. "We're just trying not to put pressure on you." Pressure, I nearly laughed. I was making life or death calls before dawn, watching lives bleed out on tables and fighting to bring them back, and the thing that crushed me most was not pressure. It was erasure. At the hospital, though, I was no one's ghost. I was Dr. Carter, I earned that. People requested me for critical rotations. Attendings asked for my insights in complex cases. Younger residents followed me like shadows, taking mental notes on how I handled chaos with unshakable calm. One late night, after a successful aneurysm clipping, I caught sight of myself in the mirror of the scrub room, blood-spattered gown, dark circles under my eyes, hands trembling slightly from focus and fatigue, and I smiled, not out of vanity, but out of recognition. I had become exactly the person I promised myself I would be. All those years ago under the covers with a flashlight and an anatomy book, the one they said I couldn't be, the one they never even imagined. Of course, I still went home for holidays. Not because I wanted to, because I felt obligated. There's a difference. Harper always dominated the conversation. She'd found a new boyfriend, an investor who worked in luxury real estate and was considering launching her own crystal line. My parents beamed with pride. When they asked what I'd been up to, I simply said, "Work's busy," and changed the subject. I'd stopped trying to bridge the gap. It was no longer a gap. It was a canyon. And I had learned to be okay with that. Because the truth is, some people will never see you unless someone else shines a spotlight on you. And that spotlight was coming, sooner than anyone expected. I was 29 the day the email arrived. Subject line: Chief of Surgery, recruitment inquiry from Director, Brigham and Women's Hospital, Boston. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a prank, something meant for someone 10 years older with twice the experience. But as I read the body of the message, words like rising leader, exceptional record, vision for surgical innovation, my hands started to tremble. They weren't looking for just any surgeon. They were looking for me. I reread the email 3 times before closing my laptop and sitting in stunned silence on the floor of my apartment. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with its usual urgency, but inside my small studio, time held still. I was being considered for one of the most prestigious surgical leadership roles on the East Coast, at 29, and I hadn't told a soul, not my colleagues, not my mentors, certainly not my family, because somewhere deep inside, that old fear still lingered, the fear that if I said it out loud, someone would laugh. Or worse, dismiss it as a fluke, so I kept it private. The interview process spanned months. I flew to Boston under the guise of research presentations and clinical collaboration. I met with board members, designed a 5-year strategic plan for surgical excellence, and toured the hospital in tailored suits that felt like armor. I remember one conversation with the current chief, a brilliant and kind man in his 60s. He said, "You remind me of myself 30 years ago, except you're sharper, faster, and far more resilient." When the offer came through officially, I didn't cry. I exhaled. I stood at my window overlooking Central Park, a glass of champagne in hand, and whispered aloud to no one, they were wrong about me. And yet, I didn't tell my parents. I tried to imagine their faces, tried to picture the moment I'd finally say, "I'm the new chief of surgery." I wanted to believe they'd be proud, awestruck, apologetic, even, but I knew better. They'd probably blink, smile politely, then ask if it meant I'd finally slow down, maybe even suggest Harper should feature me in her Empowered Women series. No, This moment was mine. I wouldn't risk having it reduced to something small. So, I said nothing. A few weeks later, my parents invited me to a family dinner to celebrate Harper's engagement. I flew in from New York, grateful for the excuse to see my sister despite everything. Her fiancé was a luxury real estate developer. The engagement ring was a rock, the kind that seemed to need its own security detail. The dinner was held at an upscale restaurant downtown, all white linens and champagne flutes. When I arrived 20 minutes late due to flight delays, my father was mid-toast. "To Harper," he said, beaming. "She's always known what she wanted and gone after it. A true Carter." I slipped into my seat quietly. No one acknowledged my arrival, save for a distracted nod from my mother. Harper was radiant, of course. She always was. Telling stories about how James proposed on a rooftop in Santorini, how she'd cried, how they'd already begun planning the ceremony. My parents clung to every word, glowing with pride. I sat in silence, swirling my water, wondering just briefly what it might feel like to have someone ask me what I'd been up to. That chance came, eventually, when my cousin Rachel leaned across the table and said, "So, Evelyn, are you still at that hospital in New York?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Oh yes," she said with a sigh. "Still working those crazy hours. We keep telling her there's more to life than work. Don't we, Robert?" My father chuckled. "Better late than never. She'll figure it out." I stared at them. I had just accepted a position that would place me among the youngest female chiefs of surgery in the country, and they were still treating me like some lost intern in a lab coat. I opened my mouth. "Actually," but Harper clinked her glass just then, standing with a grin. "James and I have some news," she said. A pause. "We're expecting—" The room erupted in cheers. I sat back, watching them embrace her, cry, toast again. My mother clutched Harper like a lifeline. My father wiped away a tear. No one noticed I hadn't finished my sentence, and no one cared. And in that moment, surrounded by clinking glasses and laughter, I made a decision. They would find out who I was. But not through a conversation, not through a speech. They would find out in the most undeniable way possible. 2 weeks after the engagement dinner, I was in the middle of a departmental meeting at Brigham when my assistant knocked gently on the conference room door. She never interrupted. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice low but urgent. "There's a call from someone named Lorraine Carter. She said it's about your sister. She's being transported here." My blood turned to ice. I stepped out and took the call in the hallway, heart already racing. "Mom," I answered. "Oh, thank God," she cried. "It's Harper. She collapsed at home. She's pregnant. The baby Evelyn. We didn't know what to do. The ambulance is bringing her to your hospital. My hospital." The irony sliced cleanly through my chest. Of all the places in Boston they could have taken her, this was the one? "I'm on my way down to the ED," I told her, already moving. I shed my blazer, tied back my hair, and took the elevator with the kind of stillness only a seasoned surgeon knows how to carry in a storm. Beneath it, panic brewed not about the medicine, but the moment. Would they recognize me? Would it even matter when I reached the emergency department? Harper had already been triaged and moved to the high-risk obstetrics unit. I pulled up her chart on the internal system. 28 weeks. Elevated BP. Severe preeclampsia suspected. Serious but treatable. She was in the right place. I checked her vitals, confirmed the attending on call was Dr. Anika Desai, one of the best in the region, and made my way to Harper's room. I wasn't wearing my white coat or ID badge, just a blouse and slacks. I didn't want to make this about me. At least, not yet. When I approached the room, I heard voices through the door. My mother, anxious and sharp. "I don't understand why it's taking so long. The doctor should have seen her by now." I took a deep breath and entered. Harper was pale but conscious. My father stood by the window, arms folded. My mother sat beside Harper's bed, gripping her hand. They all looked up when I walked in. "Oh, Evelyn," my mother said. "You got here quickly?" I nodded. "I work here." "Remember," she blinked, "you work in New York. I transferred a few months ago. They didn't ask why, they didn't ask how, just resumed their roles as worried parents, assuming as always I was a bystander. How are you feeling?" "Harper," I asked. She gave a weary sigh. "Terrible. They say my blood pressure's through the roof. I don't even know what that means." I glanced at the monitors. "It means we need to keep you calm. I just hope they send someone experienced," my mother muttered. My father added, "The longer they take, the worse this could get." I opened my mouth to speak to explain that she was already in the hands of one of the best OBs in the country, but something in their faces stopped me. That look, the one I'd known since childhood. Disbelief. Dismissal. They still didn't see me, so I didn't correct them. The room fell into uncomfortable silence. I sat quietly in the corner, watching Harper shift on the mattress, my mother fuss with her blanket, my father glance repeatedly at his watch. I had dropped everything, postponed meetings, rescheduled a surgical debrief, and yet they acted like I wasn't even there. At one point, my mother leaned closer to Harper and said in a stage whisper, "Maybe now Evelyn will understand what really matters." My sister gave a small nod. "Family," she murmured. I said nothing, because what could I say to people who had never once asked how I was truly doing? The answer came soon enough. About 40 minutes later, the door opened. A young nurse entered, Nurse Dorsey. "One of our best," she greeted Harper, checked her vitals, and turned toward me. Her eyes widened with sudden recognition. And then she straightened, shoulders squared, eyes alert, and she gave a small, respectful nod. "Good afternoon, Chief Carter," she said clearly. "I didn't realize you were already with the patient." The silence in the room collapsed into a vacuum. My father froze. My mother's eyes went wide. Harper stared at me as if I had grown an extra head. Nurse Dorsey continued calmly. "Dr. Desai is on her way. I'll update her that you've reviewed the chart." "Thank you, nurse," I said, standing slowly. "Yes, I've looked through it. I'll remain involved in an observational capacity unless otherwise needed." Harper's voice was the first to break the stunned quiet. "Wait, Chief of Surgery." I turned to face them fully. "Yes, I was appointed 2 months ago. But why didn't you tell us?" my mother whispered. I looked her dead in the eye. Would it have mattered if I had the door opened again? Dr. Desai swept in warm, composed, and brilliant. She smiled when she saw me. "Dr. Carter, didn't expect to see you here. Family emergency." I replied, "This is my sister, Harper." Dr. Desai turned to Harper. "We're going to take excellent care of you. I've reviewed your labs. The preeclampsia is concerning, but we caught it in time." She then looked back at me. "Given your review of the chart, would you recommend magnesium sulfate as a precaution?" The air tightened. Everyone stared at me. "Yes," I said calmly. "And continuous fetal monitoring for the next 24 hours. Dr. Desai nodded. Exactly what I had in mind. I saw it then, not just shock on their faces, but something deeper. Recalculation, realization, and in my father's eyes a flash of something like fear. For the first time in my life, my family was looking at me not as Evelyn the afterthought, but Evelyn the authority, Evelyn the expert, Evelyn the chief of surgery, and we had only just begun. The next few minutes passed in a strange blur. Harper had fallen quiet, her earlier drama replaced with stunned silence. My father stood by the window, as if unsure whether to process what had just happened or ignore it entirely. My mother fidgeted with the tissue she didn't need. eyes darting between me and the door as if waiting for someone to say it had all been a mistake. But no one did. The truth had entered the room with the weight of finality, and it would not be leaving. Dr. Desai began explaining the treatment plan to Harper in calm, clinical detail. Preeclampsia could be dangerous, yes, but with close monitoring, magnesium therapy, and rest, we had a good chance of stabilizing her. The baby's vitals were still strong. Harper nodded, but I could tell she was still watching me, really watching me for the first time in years. I stood by the medical monitors, my arms crossed. I wasn't the primary on her case, but I knew every number on that screen. And they all told me the same thing: she'd be okay. Eventually. Dr. Desai left to place the orders. A nurse entered to begin setting up the IV line. I stepped back to make room. That's when my father spoke. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice tight. "You're telling me Evelyn is making decisions about Harper's care. Isn't that a conflict of interest?" The nurse glanced between us, confused. "I'm not making the final decisions," I said calmly. "Dr. Desai is... I'm here in a consulting capacity as family, and as chief of surgery at this hospital." His face twisted. "Since when? Since 3 months ago." My mother's mouth fell open. "But you never said anything, because you never asked," I said, leveling my gaze at her. "Not really." She looked wounded. "That's not fair. We've always supported you." From the bed, Harper made a scoffing sound. "Oh, come on," she said, her voice rough. "Let's not pretend." Everyone turned to her. Evelyn," she said, correcting herself, "has been busting her ass for years, and you two barely noticed. Meanwhile, I drop out of college and start a yoga blog, and you act like I cured cancer." "Harper," my mother snapped. "This isn't the time." "No," she said, sitting up straighter despite the IV line. "Maybe it is the time. Evelyn's been killing herself to get here, and you're acting like she just wandered in off the street in scrubs." My father tried to salvage it with a weak smile. "Of course we're proud. We just didn't know. You didn't tell us. I stopped telling you because it hurt," I said softly. They both looked at me. "You spent years thinking I was lost, struggling. You told people I was reconsidering my path when I was performing at the top of one of the most brutal programs in the country. You called my success an obsession. You made me small so Harper could shine." "That's not true," my mother whispered. "It is," I said, not angry, just clear, and I let it happen for a long time. I tried to be understanding. I tried to protect myself from the hurt. But now I'm done pretending. My father sighed, defensive. "We only ever wanted what was best for you." "No," I said. "You wanted what you thought was best for me. There's a difference. You never tried to understand who I was. You only ever saw who I wasn't." The room fell silent. Harper looked away. My mother blinked rapidly. My father's jaw flexed and unflexed, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the version that didn't make him look small. Then Nurse Dorsey returned with a second nurse and a resident I recognized, Dr. Patel, sharp and competent. They both greeted me with the same quiet respect that had become routine in these halls. "Dr. Carter," Dr. Patel said, "vitals are holding. We'll monitor overnight, but we don't see any immediate risk of seizure activity." "Good," I replied. "Keep me posted if her BP spikes again." He nodded. "Yes, Chief." Another tremor ran through my mother at the word Chief. It sounded so permanent, so official, so real, like the title itself was carving a new identity into her daughter's skin, one she couldn't deny, couldn't shape, couldn't reduce. As the staff filtered out, Harper cleared her throat. Her voice was quieter now. "You really run this whole place?" I nodded. "Not the whole hospital, just surgery." She blinked. "Wow." There was no sarcasm in it, just awe. And then, quietly, "I had no idea. I know she didn't apologize." "Not exactly. But her face did, and I took it. I sat by her bedside as the magnesium drip started. My mother busied herself with Harper's blanket, her lips tight. Finally, she looked at me again. "You could have told us. Would it have changed anything?" I asked. "We might have been more supportive." I gave a short, dry laugh. "You were never not supportive because you didn't know. You were not supportive because you never believed." She flinched at that. "I was top of my class, and you told me I looked tired. I got into med school, and you said it might be too hard. I published in major journals, and you told relatives I was still studying. We didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice shaking. "But you did." Then, Harper spoke again. "I was jealous of you. You know," she said softly. "That stopped me. What I knew, how they looked at me." She continued, "Like I could do no wrong. And I liked it. But I always knew I didn't earn it. I wasn't actually doing anything impressive. Not like you." I stared at her. She looked down at her IV line, twisting it between her fingers. "They always gave me the spotlight. But you built something real. And I could never figure out how you kept going when no one clapped for you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. Because I wasn't building it for the applause. I said, I was building it so I couldn't be erased. The door opened again. Dr. Desai returned with the full plan. As she laid it out step by step, risk by risk, I stood by, no longer the outsider. She deferred to me again on a few technical points. Nurses entered and exited, all addressing me with deference. And with every Dr. Carter or chief, I could feel my parents shrinking a little more. Not out of shame, at least not yet, but out of the slow, creeping realization that the story they'd been telling about me for decades had never been true. And now, in this room, the truth towered over them, undeniable. After Dr. Desai left, I stood up and gathered my things. "I'll be down the hall if anything changes." I told Harper, "Wait," my mother said. "Can we talk privately?" I hesitated, then nodded. We stepped outside into the hallway. She was quiet for a long time. "Then you were right." "We didn't see you." I looked at her. "You didn't want to—" Her lip quivered. "I was scared. You were always so intense, so driven. And I didn't understand it. I thought if I encouraged it, you'd break. I didn't break." I said, "No." She whispered, "You didn't. You soared." We stood there for a moment, two women who had spent most of their lives misunderstanding each other. "I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight," I said, "but I'm not hiding who I am anymore, and I'm not shrinking to make anyone else feel comfortable." She nodded. "I don't want you to," she said, back in the room. Harper had fallen asleep. My father was seated quietly by the window, staring out into the city. He didn't speak as I returned, but when I turned to leave again, he said, "You did good, kid." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. That night, I walked out of the hospital into the cold Boston air. My coat billowed behind me, my name stitched into the lining, and Evelyn Carter, chief of surgery for the first time. I didn't feel the need to prove anything. They saw me now, the whole me, not because I shouted, not because I begged, but because I became undeniable. Harper was discharged 5 days later, stable and cautiously optimistic. The treatment had worked. The baby was doing well. She was instructed to rest, reduce stress, and return for weekly checkups. I walked her to the car as our father loaded her bags in the trunk. Our mother fluttered anxiously beside her, fussing over pillows and hospital socks. Harper turned to me just before getting in. Her eyes were tired, but clear. "Hey," she said. "You saved me." I smiled. "No. Dr. Desai did. I just stood in the corner and made a few quiet recommendations." "Yeah," she replied. "But it felt like you were running the whole damn place." I raised an eyebrow. "That's because I do." She laughed genuinely. not theatrically. It was the first time in a long time I heard something real in her voice. Then, with an unusual seriousness, she added, "I want my kid to know you, the real you, not the version they told us you were." That hit me harder than I expected. "I'd like that," I said quietly. "And maybe one day," she said, smirking. "You can explain what a chief of surgery actually does, because I still don't fully get it." I chuckled. Deal. The following weeks were quieter than I anticipated. My parents didn't bombard me with questions. There was no sudden cascade of invitations or grand gestures, just a slow, awkward re-entry into something resembling mutual recognition. They called a little more. Not every day. But when they did, they asked about me, really asked. "How's the surgical unit restructuring going? What kind of cases are you taking lately? What was that award you were nominated for?" I kept my answers short at first, but eventually I let the walls drop an inch or two. They were trying, in their own clumsy way, but I wasn't waiting for transformation. I wasn't holding my breath for them to become the parents I always wished for. That's not how healing works. It's not about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about refusing to let it define your future. Harper and I began to rebuild something too, though not the old script of siblings competing for space at the table. That version of us was gone. We started texting occasionally. She sent me baby updates. I sent her late-night photos of empty ORs and half-finished progress notes. It was small, but it was honest. And that made it enough. 6 months after Harper's hospitalization, I was invited to speak at the hospital's annual gala. The event honored surgical innovation, and I was being recognized for leading the development of a new minimally invasive cardiac technique that had drastically reduced recovery time in high-risk patients. I wasn't sure whether to invite my family. But at the last minute, I did. They arrived on time, dressed impeccably. My mother wore pearls, my father, a crisp navy suit. Harper, radiant with her baby bump, leaned on James's arm. I expected awkward smiles and stiff small talk. Instead, I saw something unfamiliar. Pride. But not the performative kind. Not the look what we made pride. The kind that shows up quietly. The kind that knows it's late but comes anyway. When I walked on stage, the applause felt surreal. The hospital director introduced me with words that made my throat tighten. A pioneer, a quiet force of excellence, and a woman who has redefined what leadership in medicine can look like. I spoke about surgical breakthroughs, about the importance of representation in leadership, and about what it means to build a legacy not rooted in spotlight but in substance. Afterward, as guests mingled and music played, my father approached me with a glass of sparkling cider. "I had no idea," he said. "I know. The way people talk about you. You're really changing lives." "That's why I do it," I said simply. "It was never about proving anything." He nodded. "I think I finally get that." We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but we stood there, side by side, as people walked past and congratulated me. And for once, he didn't correct them. He didn't shrink the moment. He let it stand. Over the next year, the relationships continued to evolve slowly, imperfectly. My mother began referring to me as our daughter, the surgeon without that strained tone of disbelief. My father occasionally sent me articles about new surgical innovations, underlining lines he thought I'd like. They didn't always make sense, but the effort was new and touching. Harper had a healthy baby boy. She named him Mason Elijah. When she brought him to the hospital to visit, she handed him to me and said, "This is your Aunt Evelyn. She's kind of a big deal." He gripped my finger with his tiny fist, and something cracked open in my chest, something soft and old and long hidden. Later, Harper pulled me aside. "I don't know if I ever told you," she said. But I always wanted to be you. I blinked. What? She shrugged. Not the surgeon part, but the strength, the clarity. You always knew what mattered even when nobody saw it. I didn't have that. I put a hand on her shoulder. Maybe you do now. I don't pretend everything's perfect. Old habits run deep. There are still moments at holidays, family events, random phone calls where I feel the shadow of the past, the silence, the subtle doubts. But I don't live in that space anymore. Because now I know who I am. Not because they finally saw it, but because I saw it first and never stopped building toward it. I mentor young doctors now, especially women. Especially those from families like mine. Families who love them, maybe, but don't believe in them. Not yet. I tell them, build quietly if you must, but build relentlessly, because eventually excellence becomes undeniable, even to those most committed to denying it. If you're reading this, and you've ever felt unseen by your own family, like your value was invisible, your dreams too ambitious, your fire too strange, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't need their permission to rise. Your worth is not a group project. And sometimes the most powerful validation is not proving them wrong. It's proving yourself right. Brick by brick, suture by suture, step by steady step, until one day, they look at you and say, "We had no idea." And you smile, because you always did.